I've just been to Toyota Canada, where I bought this block heater for my 2012 Prius C. Toyota wants $250 for this as a dealer installed option, but the part itself only costs $100. So why don't we go ahead and install it ourselves and save the $150 installation fee. So let's see what's in the box. We've got the AC cord, got the actual heating element. We have a tube of thermal paste so that the heating element can be bonded to the block. Looks like 10 cable ties and a Velcro tie, and finally a cover which goes on the wall end of the AC cord. Now before we install it, we should make sure that it actually works. So I'm going to take the heating element and plug it into its cable. You're going to find that this is actually pretty tight, so don't be afraid to use a lot of force to push that connector home. And then we'll plug it into the wall. I'm going to use my kilowatt meter so we can see just how much power it takes up. Okay, it looks like 400 watts at about 3.5 amps. And, oh yeah, this is getting very hot, so time to unplug it. Okay, it works. Now, this 400 watt element is going to burn out unless it's got something massive like the engine block to dump all its heat into, so don't leave it plugged in for very long. Okay, let's head out to the garage and do the install. The heater's pretty simple to install, but it's tucked in underneath one of the coolant hoses just to make it interesting. It's this hose here. We could remove it, but then we'd have to clean up the spilled coolant, reattach, and refill it. So we're just going to reach around underneath to do the work. But the space under there is pretty tight, and if you have big hands, it might be worthwhile for you to remove the coolant hose. The heater element slides into this hole on the side of the engine block. That's the right side of the block, as seen from our vantage point at the front of the car. But there's a hidden snag under there. There's a breather valve sticking up from the transmission housing that's in the way. We're going to have to remove that valve to give us room to insert the heater element, then reinstall it once we're done. You might want to wipe down the hose in the area underneath before you get started. You'll still get your hands dirty, but maybe just not quite as much. We'll need a 14mm wrench to unscrew the breather valve. A box wrench with 12 points works best because there's not much room down there to swing the wrench back and forth. A ratcheting wrench is even better, and in fact if you don't have one it might be worth getting one just for this job because it's so cramped down there. We're going to jam our hand down underneath and feel our way to get the wrench onto the valve, then unscrew it. Pay attention to how much force you need to loosen the valve, because that's how much force we'll need to tighten it back up again when we're done. And here's the removed valve. We'll just put it aside somewhere safe for now. The next step is to apply the thermal paste. This is absolutely essential to facilitate the transfer of heat from the heating element to the engine block. So we'll take some of the paste and smear it inside the heater element hole in the engine block. Then take some more and smear it onto the heater element, taking care to keep it away from the electrical contacts. Now we'll just set the heating element down long enough to clean our hands so that we don't get the paste on everything. When we install the heater element, we have to make sure that this little clip faces the front of the engine so that it can snap into place and hold the element securely. Now we'll just have to slide the heating element into the hole, trying to avoid mucking up anything with the paste, and remembering to keep the clip facing forward. You may have to rotate the element so that the flat part of the connector end faces down so that you can get it past this cable. I had to use a screwdriver to push down on the cable to get enough room to slide it in. And when the clip snaps into place, the element is installed. Next, we'll reinstall the breather valve. Screw it in by hand and then tighten with your wrench using about the same amount of force that it took to loosen it. And now everything's installed except the AC cable. Keep these points in mind when you install the cable and fasten it off with the tie wraps. First, avoid letting the cable touch anything that gets really hot, such as the engine block itself. Next, use the cable ties to securely fasten the cable and try to ensure that it's fastened tight to anything that it contacts on the engine so that the vibration doesn't cause any rubbing that could eventually wear through the cable and short it out. And lastly, leave a little slack in the cable where it runs between the engine drivetrain combination and the body. The engine is on a flexible mount, and it can twist an inch or so under heavy braking or acceleration. The cable needs to have enough slack to accommodate that kind of movement. Here's how I routed the cable, and where I tie wrapped it. This tie wrap is the last anchor point on the engine. This loop provides the slack for engine movement, and the rest of the tie wraps are to fixed points in the engine compartment. I left the cable end loose in the tray above the radiator. So the last thing we need to do is to loop the plug cover onto the plug. And we're done.